In the winter of 1974, while most of French Lick, Indiana slept under a blanket of snow, Robert Barker walked the empty streets before dawn, his breath visible in the cold morning air. At 72 years old, he still maintained his routine of checking on the community basketball court he had maintained for over 4 decades, the same court where a young Larry Bird first learned to shoot hoops. The metallic clang of a basketball hitting the rim echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Robert paused, a familiar sound that brought back countless memories. He had heard that same sound thousands of times before, but today it carried a different weight. His arthritic hands, buried deep in the pockets of his threadbare jacket, reminded him of how things had changed. The community knew Robert as Coach B, though he had never officially held that title. He was the man who kept the court's lights on after hours, who replaced nets when they frayed, and who offered quiet words of encouragement to any kid willing to put in the work. What they didn't know was that Robert could no longer afford to heat his modest home on Pine Street, the same home where he had lived for 50 years. The winter had been particularly harsh that year, and Robert's fixed income couldn't keep up with the rising costs. But he was a proud man, cut from that sturdy Midwest cloth that valued self-reliance above all else. He would never ask for help, even as the temperature inside his home dropped to dangerous levels. As Robert approached the court, he noticed something unusual. The lights were already on, casting long shadows across the frost-covered concrete, and there, in the pre-dawn darkness, a solitary figure was practicing free throws. The rhythmic bounce of the ball, the squeak of shoes on concrete, the soft swish of the net. It was a symphony Robert knew by heart. The figure turned, and Robert recognized him immediately. Larry Bird, now a legend in the making, had returned home. But this wasn't the Larry Bird that sports magazines wrote about, or the one whose name was beginning to echo through NBA circles. This was still the quiet kid who used to shoot hoops until his fingers were numb from the cold, the one who would help Robert repair the backboards without being asked. "Morning, Coach B," Larry called out, his voice carrying across the empty court. He hadn't called Robert that in years, but the title still fit like a well-worn glove. "Thought I might find you here." Robert nodded, trying to hide how the cold made his joints ache. "Some things never change, Larry. You're still the first one on the court." Larry walked over, the basketball tucked under his arm. Even in the dim light, Robert could see the concern in his former student's eyes. Word traveled fast in small towns, and Larry had heard about Robert's situation from his mother, who worked at the local diner. "Been meaning to thank you," Larry said, his voice soft but firm. "All those nights you kept the lights on, all those times you fixed the rim when we bent it." Never really got the chance to say it properly. Robert waved off the gratitude. "You earned every minute of court time, Larry. We all knew you were headed for something special." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 generations bound by the game they loved. Larry bounced the ball once, twice, then held it still. "Coach B, my mom told me about the heating situation." Robert felt his pride stiffen his spine. "Nothing to worry about, Larry. I've weathered worse." But Larry Bird wasn't just the quiet kid from French Lick anymore. He had learned lessons beyond basketball on this court. Lessons about community, about taking care of your own, about recognizing when someone who had given so much needed something in return. "You taught me something important here, Coach," Larry continued, his eyes fixed on the basket. "You showed me that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about what you give back." Robert watched as Larry took another shot, the ball arcing perfectly through the cold morning air. The swish of the net was as familiar as a heartbeat. "You didn't need me to teach you that, Larry. You always had it in you." But Larry wasn't finished. He had spent the night thinking about the man who had kept the lights on for him, who had believed in him when he was just another small-town kid with big dreams. The man who now couldn't afford to keep his own home warm. "Remember what you used to tell us?" Larry asked, retrieving the ball. about how basketball is like life. It's not just about making shots. It's about making the right moves at the right time. Robert nodded, the memory warming him more than his thin jacket could. Seems like a lifetime ago. Well, Larry said, I learned that lesson well. And right now, Coach B, it's time for me to make the right move. What happened next would become a story that French Lick would tell for generations, a testament to the power of kindness and the way it echoes through time. But at that moment, in the pre-dawn quiet of a small Indiana town, it was just two men standing on a basketball court, surrounded by memories and the promise of warmth to come. That morning marked the beginning of a chain of events that would remind everyone in French Lick that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from those who remember where they started. And Larry Bird had never forgotten. He had never forgotten the sound of that rim, the feel of that court, or the man who kept the lights on so a young boy could chase his dreams. That evening, as the sun set over French Lick, Larry Bird couldn't shake the image of Robert Barker's weathered hands, or the way the old coach had tried to hide his shivering in the morning cold. The temperature was dropping again, and Larry knew that Coach B's house would be barely warmer than the outdoor court where they had met at dawn. While most of the town settled in for dinner, Larry made a series of phone calls. First to his old high school teammate Andrew Pierce, who now owned the local hardware store, then to Chad Lamb, who ran the heating company 2 towns over. The conversations were brief, but the purpose was clear. Coach B wouldn't spend another night in the cold. You don't understand what he did for us, Larry explained to Chad over the phone, his voice carrying the weight of years of gratitude. He didn't just keep the lights on, he kept our dreams alive. By 8 o'clock that evening, a small convoy of trucks pulled up outside Robert's house on Pine Street. Chad Lamb's heating van led the way, followed by Andrew Pierce's pickup truck loaded with supplies. Larry Bird's car brought up the rear, his headlights illuminating the frost already forming on Robert's front lawn. Robert was sitting in his living room, wrapped in layers of blankets, when he heard the vehicles outside. The knock on his door was firm but gentle. When he opened it, he found Larry Bird standing there, flanked by familiar faces from the community. "Larry, what's all this about?" Robert asked, his pride wrestling with his curiosity. "Coach B," Larry replied. "Remember how you always told us that basketball is a team sport? Well, life is too, and tonight we're your team." Before Robert could protest, the group was already moving with purpose. Chad Lamb and his crew began inspecting the old heating system, while Andrew Pierce and his workers started unloading equipment from their trucks. The night air was filled with the sounds of work and purpose, of wrenches turning and voices calling out instructions. Larry stayed with Robert in the living room, sharing stories about the old days on the court. Each tale was a thread, connecting past to present, reminding both men of the bonds that time couldn't break. "You remember that night in '69? Robert asked, his eyes bright with memory. "When you wouldn't leave until you made 50 free throws in a row?" Larry smiled, nodding. "Made it to 49 3 times before I finally got there. You stayed out there with me for hours, Coach. Never said a word about going home, never complained about the cold. Because I saw something in you, Larry. Something special." "No, Coach," Larry corrected gently. "You saw something special in all of us. You just gave us the chance to find it ourselves." As they talked, the sounds of work continued throughout the house. Chad's team was installing a brand new heating system, one that would keep Robert warm through this winter and many more to come. Andrew's crew was adding insulation, sealing windows, and making sure every crack and gap that let in the cold would be sealed. But Larry Bird had done more than just arrange for repairs. He had set up an account at the local utility company, prepaying for Robert's heating bills for the next 5 years. It wasn't charity. Larry would never disrespect Coach B that way. It was an investment in the man who had invested so much in others. Around midnight, the work was nearly complete, The new heating system hummed quietly, already beginning to warm the house. Robert stood in his living room, overwhelmed by the transformation that had taken place in just a few hours. "Larry, I can't accept all this," he started to say, but Larry cut him off with a gentle shake of his head. "Coach B, do you remember what you told me the first time I wanted to quit? When the other kids were better than me, and I thought I'd never make it?" Robert nodded slowly. "I told you that greatness isn't about being the best. It's about making others better." "Exactly," Larry said, his voice thick with emotion. "And that's what you did for all of us. You made us better, not just as players, but as people. This isn't charity, Coach. This is us finally getting to return the favor." As the crews packed up their tools and prepared to leave, the temperature inside Robert's house continued to rise. But it wasn't just the new heating system warming the space. It was the realization that every kind word, every late night on the court, every moment of encouragement he had given had not been forgotten. Larry stood in the doorway, ready to leave, but he had one more thing to say. "Coach B, you kept the lights on for us when we needed them. Now it's our turn to make sure you stay warm." Robert looked around his warm house, then back at Larry, the boy who had become a man, the student who had become a teacher of kindness. "Thank you, Larry," he said simply, knowing that anything more would bring tears to both their eyes. As Larry drove away that night, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Through Robert's front window, he could see the warm light glowing, a beacon in the cold Indiana night. It reminded him of all those evenings on the court, when a single light had shown him the way to his dreams. The story spread through French Lick in the following days, not as a tale of celebrity generosity, but as a reminder of how community works, of how kindness echoes across years and generations. It wasn't just about a famous basketball player helping his old coach. It was about a student remembering the lessons that went beyond the game. That winter, whenever anyone passed by Robert's house on Pine Street, they would see the warm glow from his windows, feel the heat from his new system, and remember that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness are simply returning the warmth that others once gave to us. And on cold mornings, Robert still walked to the community court, where he would often find Larry shooting baskets when he was in town. They never talked about that night again. They didn't need to. The warmth of gratitude, like the warmth of kindness, needs no words to be felt. The morning after Larry Bird's overnight renovation of Coach B's house, French Lick woke to more than just another winter day. The story of what had happened on Pine Street traveled through the town like warmth through newly installed heating vents, touching hearts and awakening memories in everyone who heard it. Lisa Wallace, who ran the local diner where Robert came for his morning coffee, was one of the first to notice the change. That morning, Robert walked in with a different kind of energy, his shoulders straighter, his smile warmer than the coffee she served him. "You look different today, Robert," Lisa said, sliding his usual breakfast plate across the counter. So, eggs and toast were on the house. They had been ever since she learned he had been skipping meals to pay his heating bills. "Had some visitors last night," Robert replied, his eyes twinkling. "Larry Bird and some of the boys from town. They reminded me of something important." Lisa leaned in, curious. She had known Larry since he was a teenager when he would come in after practice, hungry enough to eat everything on the menu. "And what's that?" "That sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is accepting their gratitude," Robert said, taking a sip of his coffee. The warmth reminded him of his now cozy house, of the quiet hum of the new heating system, of the way Larry had transformed his home in a single night. As Robert shared the story, other customers gathered around. Beverly Davis, the retired school teacher, who had taught Larry in 3rd grade, wiped away tears as she listened. "That boy," she said, shaking her head with pride. "He always had a good heart, even when he was struggling with his multiplication tables." But the story didn't stop at the diner's doors. It spread through French Lick like a warm front moving across Indiana. At the hardware store, Andrew Pierce found himself telling customers about how Larry had called him, about the urgency in his voice when he explained what needed to be done. He didn't just want to fix the heating, Andrew would explain, arranging nuts and bolts in their bins. He wanted to fix the whole house, said Coach B deserved to be warm in every room, not just where the heat could reach. At the local high school, where the basketball court still bore the marks of countless games, Coach Eric Horn gathered his team before practice. The teenagers, all dreaming of their own Larry Bird moments, fell silent as he spoke. Last night, Eric began, his voice echoing in the gym. One of the greatest players to ever come out of French Lick taught us all a lesson, and it wasn't about basketball. He told them about Robert Barker, about the countless hours he had spent maintaining the community court, about how he had kept the lights on for generations of players. He told them about Larry Bird, not as an NBA legend, but as a former student who remembered where he came from. Success isn't just about making it big, Eric continued, bouncing a basketball thoughtfully. It's about remembering who helped you get there and making sure you help others along the way. The story reached Kyle Arnold at the local newspaper, who saw in it something more than just a heartwarming tale. He saw a thread that connected past and present, a reminder of how communities sustain themselves through acts of kindness, both large and small. Kyle sat down with Robert one afternoon, not to write a story about Larry Bird's generosity, but to document the decades of quiet dedication that had preceded it. As they talked in Robert's newly warm living room, the old coach shared stories that had never been told. He spoke of summer nights when he would stay late at the court, watching young players work on their game. He remembered Lisa Quinn now, a successful business owner, practicing her dribbling until her hands were calloused. He talked about David Smith, who never made the high school team but learned about perseverance on that court. The thing about Larry, Robert told Kyle, is that he understood what that court meant to this town. It wasn't just about basketball, it was about having a place where dreams could grow. The article Kyle wrote wasn't just about one night of kindness, it was about the web of connections that bound French Lick together, about how one person's dedication could inspire generations of kindness in return. As winter deepened, Robert's house became more than just a warm shelter from the cold. It became a symbol of what community meant in small-town Indiana. People would drive by, point to the house, and tell their children about the man who kept the lights on and the boy who never forgot. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the current generation of young players who practiced on the community court. They began to notice Robert's daily walks, to wave and call out greetings. Some would stop their games to help him clear snow from the sidelines or replace a worn-out net. One evening, as Robert made his usual check of the court, he found a group of teenagers waiting for him. Led by Michael Washington, a promising young point guard, they had stayed late to help him with his routine maintenance. "Mr. Barker," Michael said, holding a new basketball net, "we heard about what you did for Larry Bird and all the others. We want to help too." Robert watched as the teenagers worked together, their breath visible in the cold air, their laughter warming the winter night. He saw in them the same spirit that had driven him to keep the lights on all those years ago, the same understanding that some things were worth preserving. As they worked, Robert shared stories about the court's history, about the players who had come before, about a young Larry Bird practicing in the pre-dawn hours. The teenagers listened, understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. The story of Larry Bird's overnight act of kindness had done more than just warm one man's house. It had reminded an entire town of the importance of looking after their own, of remembering their roots, of passing on the warmth of gratitude to future generations. The story might have remained a cherished local legend if not for Catherine McGrath, a sports journalist from Boston who had traveled to French Lick, researching a piece on Larry Bird's early years. She had expected to write about basketball courts and high school statistics. Instead, she found herself sitting in Robert Barker's warm living room, listening to a story about something far more valuable than points scored or games won. "I never wanted recognition," Robert told her, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "The court was just something the kids needed. Larry understood that better than anyone." Catherine's article, titled "The Light Keeper, the Man Who Helped Larry Bird Soar," appeared in a national sports magazine the following month. But it wasn't the basketball elements that captured readers' attention. It was the story of quiet, dedication rewarded by unexpected kindness, of gratitude expressed not through words, but through actions. The piece caught the attention of Isaiah Allen, a retired NBA player who had faced Larry Bird on the court numerous times. "Reading about Coach B reminded me of Mr. Thompson, my own childhood mentor," Isaiah shared during a television interview. "These people shape lives without ever asking for anything in return. Larry showed us all how to say thank you properly." Soon, similar stories began emerging from other communities. In Chicago, Deborah Kelly, who had maintained a neighborhood basketball court for 30 years, arrived one morning to find it completely renovated. The anonymous donor had left a simple note: "Inspired by Coach B and Larry Bird." The movement spread beyond basketball. In Seattle, Robin Baker, a retired music teacher who had given free piano lessons to underprivileged children for decades, received an unexpected delivery: a brand new piano and enough music supplies to last years. The gift came with a newspaper clipping about Larry Bird and Coach B back in French Lick. Robert watched in quiet amazement as his story inspired others to look around their own communities, to find the unsung heroes who had shaped lives without fanfare or recognition. Paul Hansen, a local business owner, established the Coach B Foundation, dedicated to supporting community mentors and maintaining public spaces where young people could pursue their dreams. Larry Bird became its honorary chairman, but insisted that Robert remained the face of the organization. What happened that night wasn't just about fixing a heating system, Larry explained during the foundation's launch. It was about recognizing the people who keep the lights on for others, who show up every day to help dreams take flight. The foundation's first project was renovating community basketball courts across Indiana, ensuring each had proper lighting and maintenance, but it quickly expanded to include other spaces where mentorship happened: art studios, music rooms, workshops, and more. One day, a letter arrived at Robert's house from Cynthia Guzman, a teacher in Los Angeles. She wrote about how the story had inspired her students to look for ways to thank their own community heroes. They had started a project called Lights On, documenting the stories of people who had made a difference in their neighborhood. "Your story taught them that gratitude isn't just about saying thank you," Cynthia wrote. "It's about making sure those who helped us can continue helping others." The media attention brought visitors to French Lick, all hoping to see the famous community court and meet Coach B. Robert handled the attention with characteristic humility, always redirecting the conversation to the importance of community spaces and the power of mentorship. Eric Carrillo, a documentary filmmaker, spent a week in French Lick capturing the story. His cameras followed Robert on his daily rounds, recorded the pickup games that still happened on the court, and interviewed countless people whose lives had been touched by both Robert and Larry. "What strikes me most," Eric said during a break, "in filming is how this story has made people remember their own Coach Bs. Everyone seems to have someone who kept the lights on for them, literally or figuratively." The documentary, when it aired, sparked a national conversation about gratitude and community. Social media filled with "Sir Lights On for Coach B" stories as people shared their own experiences of mentorship and unexpected kindness. Larry Bird, watching all of this unfold, remained characteristically modest about his role. "I just did what Coach B taught us all to do," he would say when asked about it. "I looked out for someone who had looked out for others." The winter when Larry Bird had arranged for Robert's house to be heated became known in French Lick as the warm winter, not just because of the physical warmth it brought to one home, but because of the warmth of kindness it sparked across the country. Robert continued his daily walks to the court, now often accompanied by young people eager to hear his stories. He would tell them about Larry Bird, yes, but more importantly, he would tell them about the power of showing up every day, of keeping the lights on for others, of being there when dreams were taking shape. The real story, he would say, isn't about one night of kindness. It's about all the nights before that, when people chose to be there for others. Larry Bird didn't just heat my house. He reminded us all that we have the power to keep each other warm. As the story continued to spread, it became clear that what had happened in French Lick was more than just a heartwarming tale of gratitude. It was a reminder that in communities across the world, there were people like Robert Barker, quietly keeping the lights on, making dreams possible, never asking for recognition or reward. And sometimes, if they were lucky, those dreams came back home, bringing with them the warmth of gratitude and the power to inspire others to look around their own communities and ask, "Who kept the lights on for me? And how can I keep them on for others?" 5 years after Larry Bird's act of kindness transformed Robert Barker's home, the impact of that single night continued to grow in ways nobody could have predicted. The story had become more than just a tale of gratitude. It had evolved into a blueprint for community transformation. In French Lick, the original community basketball court, where Robert had kept the lights on for so many years, had become something of a sacred space. The court itself remained simple. Larry Bird had insisted on maintaining its authentic character, but the spirit of the place had changed. A small plaque now stood at the entrance, reading, "Where kindness keeps the lights on." Patrick Gibson, a local contractor who had helped with the original renovation of Robert's house, had started a unique program called Warmth Forward. Every winter, his team identified elderly community members struggling with heating costs and rallied local businesses to help. The program had already helped over 200 homes in the region. What Larry Bird did that night wasn't just about heating a house, Patrick explained, standing outside the latest home his team had helped. It was about recognizing that everyone who makes a community better deserves to be taken care of in return. The Coach B Foundation had expanded beyond its initial scope, now operating in 12 states. Under Larry Bird's guidance, it had evolved into a comprehensive community support organization. They didn't just maintain basketball courts anymore. They created spaces where mentorship could flourish. Lacey Orozco, the foundation's director of operations, worked closely with Robert to develop their mentorship program. Coach B's philosophy was simple, she explained during a foundation meeting. Show up every day, keep the lights on, and believe in people's potential. We've built our entire organization around these principles. The foundation had recently launched an initiative called Light Keepers, identifying and supporting community mentors across the country. These modern-day Coach Bs received resources, recognition, and support to continue their vital work in their communities. One such lightkeeper was Timothy Snow, a retired mechanic in Detroit who had been teaching neighborhood kids auto repair skills in his garage for 20 years. The foundation helped him establish a proper workshop, ensuring his knowledge could be passed on to future generations. When I read about Coach B and Larry Bird, Timothy shared, I realized I wasn't just teaching kids about cars. I was keeping the lights on for their futures, just like Robert did in French Lick. The story had also transformed how professional athletes viewed their relationships with their early mentors. Jennifer Bell, a WNBA star, had recently surprised her first coach with a completely renovated community center. Larry Bird showed us that gratitude isn't just about remembering where you came from, Jennifer said during the center's opening ceremony. It's about making sure those places can continue nurturing new dreams. Back in French Lick, Robert Barker's influence continued to grow, though not in ways he had ever sought or expected. His daily walks to the court had become informal mentoring sessions, with young people naturally gathering around him to hear his wisdom. Michael Washington, the young point guard who had once helped Robert maintain the court, was now coaching youth basketball. He had started a tradition called Coach B's Hours, keeping the gym open late for kids who needed extra practice time or just a safe place to be. Coach B taught us that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just be there, Michael explained, watching his young players practice. Larry Bird showed us how to thank the people who were there for us. Now, it's our turn to be there for the next generation. The impact extended beyond sports. Lisa Wallace, still running the local diner, had established a program providing free meals to community mentors. "We call it Feeding the Light Keepers," she said, serving coffee to a group of teachers who stayed late to help struggling students. The transformation was perhaps most visible in the way the community now celebrated its heroes. Every year, on the anniversary of Larry Bird's nighttime renovation of Robert's house, French Lick held what they called Light Keepers Night. During this celebration, the community gathered at the old basketball court, sharing stories of mentors who had made a difference in their lives. The event had become a powerful reminder that every community had its own Coach B's, people who quietly kept the lights on for others without expecting recognition or reward. Robert, now in his late 70s, attended these celebrations with a mixture of humility and joy. He would sit courtside, watching as people shared their stories, each one a testament to the power of showing up and believing in others. "The beautiful thing," Robert would say, "is seeing how one act of kindness can light up so many other lives. Larry didn't just warm my house that night. He sparked a fire that's still warming hearts and changing lives." The story had become required reading in French Lick schools, not just as a local history lesson, but as an example of how gratitude and community service could shape lives. Teachers used it to encourage students to look for the light keepers in their own lives and think about how they might become light keepers themselves. Chad Lamb, whose heating company had been part of the original renovation, had established an apprenticeship program for local youth. "We're not just teaching them a trade," he explained. "We're teaching them Coach B's lessons about consistency, care, and community." The ripple effects continued to spread, touching lives in unexpected ways. Beverly Davis, the retired school teacher, had started a journal project, collecting stories of community mentors from across the country. The stories painted a picture of countless individuals who, like Robert, had dedicated their lives to keeping the lights on for others. "What we're discovering," Beverly noted, "is that every community has its Coach B's. They might not all be maintaining basketball courts, but they're all doing the essential work of nurturing dreams and potential." The true measure of Larry Bird's act of kindness could be found in the individual stories of transformation that emerged in its wake. Each story was a testament to how a single gesture of gratitude could reshape not just one life, but countless others. Andrew Liu, a successful businessman from Chicago, had been moved to tears when he first read about Coach B and Larry Bird. The story reminded him of Mr. Chen, his middle school janitor who had let him practice piano in the school auditorium after hours. Andrew had lost track of Mr. Chen over the years, but the story inspired him to launch a search. Finding Mr. Chen took months, Andrew recalled, his voice thick with emotion. "When I finally located him, he was living in a small apartment, still helping neighborhood kids learn music on his old upright piano. What Andrew did next echoed Larry Bird's gesture. He purchased a small music studio for Mr. Chen, ensuring the elderly mentor could continue teaching music in a proper space. The look in his eyes when he saw the studio, it was exactly how I imagined Coach B looked that night when Larry brought warmth back to his home. In Atlanta, Robin Baker had been inspired to create the Night Watch, a network of community centers that stayed open late for young people who needed a safe space to study or pursue their interests. The initiative had been directly inspired by Robert's years of keeping the court lights on. Every community has its night owls, its dreamers who need extra time and space, Robin explained. We're making sure they have both, just like Coach B did for Larry Bird and countless others. The transformation was particularly profound among young athletes. Jack Fisher, a promising high school basketball player, had started a tradition of gathering his teammates to help maintain local recreation spaces. They called themselves the Light Brigade, and their work went far beyond basketball courts. We clean up parks, fix playground equipment, paint community centers, Jack said, adjusting a swing set in a local park. Coach B showed us that being an athlete isn't just about playing the game. It's about making sure others have the chance to play too. The story had even reached Mary Reed, an elderly teacher in Maine who had been quietly paying for her students' lunch debts for years. When her story emerged, inspired by the Coach B narrative, her community rallied around her, creating a sustainable fund to continue her work. I never wanted recognition, Mary said, echoing Robert's own words. But seeing how the story has encouraged others to look after their community's children, that makes it all worthwhile. Back in French Lick, Robert's house had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of how gratitude could transform not just a space, but a spirit. The warmth that Larry Bird had brought that night continued to radiate, touching lives in ways that went far beyond physical comfort. Eric Horn, the high school basketball coach, had begun ending each practice by asking his players a simple question. Who kept the lights on for you today? The answers revealed a web of support that many had taken for granted. Parents working extra shifts, teachers staying late, neighbors offering encouragement. It's changed how our team thinks about success, Eric explained. They understand now that no one achieves anything alone. We all need someone to keep the lights on for us. The story had particularly resonated with Bianca Andrews, a single mother who worked as a custodian at the local elementary school. She had been quietly leaving encouraging notes for struggling students, much like Robert had offered quiet words of encouragement to young players. When her story emerged, the community embraced her efforts. Parents and teachers joined in, creating a culture of encouragement that transformed the school atmosphere. Sometimes keeping the lights on means making sure someone knows they're seen and valued, Bianca reflected. The impact extended to unexpected places. Timothy Roth, a local business owner, had been inspired to create a warm welcome program, ensuring that new families moving to French Lick felt immediately embraced by the community. Larry Bird didn't just fix a heating system that night, Timothy explained. He showed us that warmth isn't just about temperature. It's about making sure everyone in our community feels valued and supported. The story continued to inspire personal transformations. Catherine Morrow, a journalist who had covered the original story, found herself establishing a mentorship program for young writers. Every story I write now, I think about Coach B and how he showed up every day, making a difference without seeking the spotlight. Even Larry Bird himself had been transformed by the lasting impact of his gesture. In quiet moments, he would visit the old court, sometimes joining Robert for his morning walks. These conversations were never about basketball statistics or career highlights. They were about the power of gratitude, the importance of community, and the countless ways people could keep the lights on for each other. What amazes me, Larry shared during one such walk, is how many people were inspired to look around their own communities and ask who needs warmth, who's been keeping the lights on for others. That's the real legacy of Coach B's story. The warmth that had started in one house on Pine Street had spread far beyond French Lick's borders, touching hearts and homes across the nation. But perhaps its most profound impact could be seen in the quiet moments, in the mentors who stayed late, in the communities that rallied around their unsung heroes, in the countless acts of kindness inspired by one winter night when a basketball legend remembered to thank the man who had kept the lights on. 10 years after Larry Bird's transformative act of kindness, the impact of that single night had evolved into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The story had become a catalyst for a nationwide movement that was reshaping how communities thought about gratitude, service, and the quiet heroes in their midst. Robert Barker, now in his 80s, sat in his warm living room, surrounded by letters from people across the country. Each envelope contained a story of how the Light Keepers movement had transformed their community. The letters were addressed simply to Coach B, French Lick, Indiana. His reputation had grown so much that no street address was needed. "I never imagined keeping those court lights on would lead to all this," Robert mused, holding a letter from Beverly Davis, who had documented hundreds of similar stories in her nationwide research. "Larry didn't just fix my heating that night. He started a conversation about how we thank those who shaped our lives." The Coach B Foundation had expanded beyond its initial scope, now operating international programs that identified and supported community mentors worldwide. Larry Bird had ensured that the foundation stayed true to its roots, focusing on the quiet heroes who showed up every day without expecting recognition. Cynthia Jackson, the foundation's new executive director, explained their evolution. "We discovered that every community has its Coach Bs, people who maintain spaces where dreams can grow. Our mission now is to ensure they never have to choose between helping others and taking care of themselves." The foundation had developed a unique approach to community support, inspired by the original story. Instead of traditional grants, they created what they called warmth networks, local systems of support that ensured community mentors had their basic needs met while they continued their important work. Eric Carrillo, whose documentary about Coach B had won several awards, had recently completed a follow-up film exploring these warmth networks. "What's remarkable," he noted, "is how the practical act of fixing someone's heating system has become a metaphor for community care. When we talk about keeping the lights on now, we're talking about sustaining the people who sustain others." The impact was particularly visible in education. Lisa Quinn, a principal in Boston, had implemented a Light Keepers program in her school, identifying teachers who went above and beyond to support students. The program ensured these educators had the resources and support they needed to continue their vital work. "We learned from Coach B that it's not enough to appreciate our mentors," Lisa explained. "We need to actively support them to keep their lights on so they can keep the lights on for others." The movement had also transformed how professional athletes thought about giving back to their communities. Inspired by Larry Bird's example, many had moved beyond traditional charitable donations to focus on identifying and supporting the quiet heroes in their hometowns. David Smith, a retired NBA player, had recently surprised his childhood mentor with a fully equipped workshop where he could continue teaching neighborhood kids woodworking. "Larry Bird showed us that true gratitude isn't just about writing a check," David said. "It's about ensuring that those who helped us can continue helping others." The original community basketball court in French Lick had become a sort of pilgrimage site for people seeking to understand the essence of community service. Robert still visited daily, now accompanied by a rotating group of volunteers who helped maintain the space. Michael Washington, the young coach who had been inspired by Robert's example, had established a nationwide network of open light community spaces, gymnasiums, workshops, art studios, and other venues that stayed open late for those who needed them. What we learned from Coach B and Larry Bird, Michael explained, is that sometimes the most important thing we can offer is space and time. Every community needs places where dreams can grow after hours. The story had even influenced corporate culture. Andrew Pierce, whose hardware store had been part of the original renovation of Robert's house, had developed a business model that other companies were now emulating. His employees were given paid time to serve as community mentors, keeping the lights on for others, just as Robert had done. It's not just about corporate social responsibility, Andrew explained. It's about recognizing that every community thrives when we support those who support others. Perhaps most significantly, the story had changed how communities identified and celebrated their local heroes. The annual Lightkeepers' Night that had started in French Lick had spread to towns and cities across the country. These celebrations became opportunities for communities to recognize and support their own. Coach B's Robert would attend these celebrations when he could, always deflecting attention from himself to focus on the newer generation of lightkeepers. The real story isn't about me or even Larry, he would say. It's about all the people who show up every day, keeping the lights on for others, making dreams possible. Larry Bird, whose simple act of gratitude had sparked this movement, remained involved but characteristically humble. He understood that what had started as a personal gesture of thanks had grown into something far more significant, a new way of thinking about community, gratitude, and the responsibility we have to support those who support others. Coach B taught us that success isn't just about what you achieve, Larry reflected during a foundation event. It's about making sure others have the chance to achieve their dreams too. That's what keeping the lights on really means. On a crisp winter morning, much like the one when our story began, Robert Barker made his way to the community basketball court for what would be his 10,000th visit. At 85, his steps were slower now, but his purpose remained unchanged. The court lights still shone in the pre-dawn darkness, just as they had for nearly 5 decades. But this morning was different. As Robert approached, he noticed something unusual. The court wasn't empty. Standing at the free throw line was Larry Bird, and beside him stood his grandson Jack, a 12-year-old with dreams as big as the Indiana sky. "Morning, Coach B," Larry called out, just as he had done countless times before. "Thought we'd get here early today." Jack wanted to meet the man who kept the lights on. The moment crystallized everything the story had come to represent. The passing of wisdom across generations, the enduring power of gratitude, and the way small acts of kindness could echo through time. Jack stepped forward, holding a basketball, and looking at Robert with wondering eyes. "Grandpa Larry says you're the reason he never gave up on basketball," the boy said. "He says you kept the lights on when nobody else would." Robert smiled, remembering all the mornings he had watched a young Larry Bird practice in similar pre-dawn hours. "Your grandfather taught me something important too," he replied. "He showed me that when you keep the lights on for others, the warmth always finds its way back." The story of that winter night when Larry Bird had transformed Robert's cold house into a warm home had become more than just a tale of gratitude. It had become a blueprint for community care, a reminder that success carried with it a responsibility to look after those who had helped along the way. The Coach B Foundation had recently launched its most ambitious initiative yet, the Million Lights Program, aimed at identifying and supporting 1 million community mentors across the globe. Each lightkeeper would receive not just resources and support, but a connection to a worldwide network of others who shared their commitment to service. Timothy Snow, now heading the Foundation's international outreach, explained the program's philosophy. Every community has its Coach Bs, people who maintain spaces where dreams can grow. Our job is to ensure they never have to choose between serving others and taking care of themselves. The original story had sparked a remarkable chain reaction. In Seattle, Robin Baker had transformed her music studio into a 24-hour creative space for young artists. In Miami, Paul Hansen had established a network of community workshops that stayed open late for aspiring craftspeople. In Chicago, Jennifer Bell had created a system of neighborhood centers that provided safe spaces for children to study and play after school hours. Each of these initiatives traced its inspiration back to that winter night in French Lick, when a basketball legend remembered to thank the man who had kept the lights on for him. But perhaps the most powerful legacy could be seen in the way communities now thought about gratitude and responsibility. The phrase, "keeping the lights on," had entered the common vocabulary, becoming shorthand for the vital work of supporting those who supported others. Larry Bird, watching his grandson practice under the court lights that Robert had maintained for so many years, reflected on how the story had grown beyond anything he had imagined. What happened that night wasn't just about fixing a heating system, he said. It was about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to look after the people who looked after us. Robert's house on Pine Street had become a symbol of this philosophy. The warm lights that shone from its windows each evening served as a reminder that gratitude, when expressed through action, could warm not just homes but hearts. The impact continued to ripple outward. Schools across the country had incorporated the story into their curriculum, using it to teach students about community service and gratitude. Business leaders studied it as a model of corporate social responsibility. Community organizers used it as a blueprint for sustainable support systems. But for Robert Barker, the true meaning of the story could be found in the simple act of showing up each day, of maintaining spaces where dreams could grow. Even now, as he watched Larry Bird teaching his grandson the fundamentals of the game, he saw the continuation of a cycle that had begun decades ago. The beautiful thing about keeping the lights on, Robert observed, is that you never know whose dreams you're illuminating. Every kid who ever practiced on this court carried a piece of it with them, and now they're keeping lights on for others in their own ways. As the sun began to rise over French Lick, casting long shadows across the court, 3 generations stood together: Robert, Larry, and young Jack. Each represented a different chapter in the story, but all were connected by the simple truth that had started it all. When we keep the lights on for others, we illuminate paths that extend far beyond our own sight. The morning light grew stronger, but the court lights remained on, just as they had for countless mornings before. They would continue to shine, not just in French Lick, but in communities across the world where people had learned the profound lesson of that winter night, that gratitude, expressed through action, could warm more than just one home. It could light up the world. You know what, Coach B, Larry said, watching his grandson practice. That night when we fixed your heating, I thought I was just paying back a debt. But you taught me something more important, that keeping the lights on isn't about paying back, it's about passing forward. Robert nodded, understanding that the true warmth of that winter night had never really been about the heating system at all. It had been about recognizing that in every community there are people who keep the lights on for others, who maintain spaces where dreams can grow, who show up day after day without expecting recognition or reward. And sometimes, if they're lucky, those dreams come home, bringing with them the warmth of gratitude and the power to light up countless other lives. That's the light that never fades. The light of kindness passed forward, of gratitude expressed through action, of community sustained through care. As young Jack continued to practice his shots in the growing daylight, the sound of the basketball against the court echoed with the same rhythm it had for generations. It was the sound of dreams taking flight, of lessons being learned, of lights being kept on for whoever might need them next. The story of Larry Bird and Coach B had become more than just a tale of one night's kindness. It had become a reminder that we all have the power to keep the lights on for others, to maintain spaces where dreams can grow, to ensure that the warmth of gratitude continues to spread from heart to heart, from home to home, from generation to generation.